The massive passenger ship Stellar Crown moved silently through space, carrying the most important people in the galaxy. Rich merchants, powerful diplomats, and famous leaders filled the expensive lounges and restaurants. The ship's walls gleamed with polished metal, and soft music played in the background. In the first-class lounge, beings from different worlds sat in comfortable chairs, drinking exotic drinks. The Altarians looked like living crystals, their skin sparkling under the soft lights. They spoke in musical voices about politics and trade deals. Nearby, the Centaurians discussed business with their deep, rumbling voices. Their skin was thick and gray like stone, and they wore expensive robes that showed their wealth. The lounge smelled of rare spices and flowers from distant planets. Waiters moved quietly between tables, serving drinks that glowed with strange colors. Everything was perfect, clean, and expensive. This was a place for the galaxy's most important people. Through the main entrance walked a human soldier. Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho looked tired, very tired. His uniform was clean, but anyone could see it had been worn for many months. The green fabric was faded in places, and his boots showed scratches from walking on rough ground. Dark circles under his eyes made him look older than his 30 years. Tae-ho moved slowly, like someone carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders. His black hair was cut short in military style, but it looked like he had been running his hands through it. He looked around the beautiful lounge with quiet eyes, taking in the luxury he had not seen in a long time. He walked up to the front desk, where a tall Altarian stood checking names on a glowing tablet. The alien's skin looked like it was made of diamonds, catching and reflecting light with every small movement. A golden nameplate on his chest read Velinari in several different languages. "Excuse me," Tae-ho said in a soft voice. "I would like a seat, please." His voice was polite and respectful, but very tired. He spoke the way someone does when they have seen too much and slept too little. His hands hung at his sides, and he stood straight despite his exhaustion. Even tired, he carried himself like a soldier. Velinari looked down at the human with cold eyes. His crystalline features seemed to grow sharper as he studied Tae-ho's worn uniform and tired face. The Altarian's expression showed clear disgust, as if he had found something dirty in his perfect lounge. "I'm afraid this lounge is reserved for passengers of distinction," Velinari said slowly, making each word sound like an insult. His musical voice carried clearly across the quiet room. "Perhaps you would be more comfortable in the general seating area." The word distinction hung in the air like a slap. Several conversations stopped as other passengers turned to watch. An Altarian diplomat nodded approvingly, her crystal face showing satisfaction. A Centaurian merchant made a sound of agreement, his stone-like features showing no sympathy for the tired soldier. "Of course humans would try to enter where they do not belong," whispered one passenger to another, not caring if Tae-ho could hear. "Military personnel should know their place," added someone else. Tae-ho stood still for a moment, absorbing the rejection and the whispered comments. His dark eyes showed a flash of sadness, but no anger. He had clearly faced this kind of treatment before. Instead of arguing or making a scene, he simply nodded once. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you." He turned away from the desk with the same quiet dignity he had shown when he entered. His shoulders did not slump with defeat. His head did not hang with shame. He walked toward the exit like a man who had learned to accept unfairness without letting it break him. As he moved through the lounge, the expensive conversations resumed. The Altarians went back to their glowing drinks. The Centaurians returned to their business deals. Within moments, it was as if the tired human soldier had never been there at all. But one person continued to watch him leave. Ambassador Yu Hajin sat in the corner of the lounge, her Centaurian features softer than most of her people. Unlike the others, she had not nodded in approval when Tae-ho was turned away. Instead, something in his quiet acceptance had touched her heart. She watched as he walked through the lounge's golden doors. noting how he carried himself with dignity, even in rejection. There was something about this human soldier that the others had missed. While they saw only a tired man in a faded uniform, she saw strength. While they saw someone beneath their notice, she saw quiet courage. Heijin had spent years in diplomatic circles, meeting powerful people from across the galaxy. She had learned to read faces and voices, to see past appearances to the truth underneath. And something about this human soldier told her there was much more to his story than anyone in this room realized. As the golden doors closed behind Taeho, Hajin made a decision that would change everything. She stood up from her expensive chair, left her glowing drink on the crystal table, and followed the tired soldier out of the first-class lounge. Ambassador Yu Hajin left the expensive first-class lounge and walked through the ship's long corridors. The stellar crown was huge, with many levels and sections for different types of passengers. She passed through areas with less decoration and cheaper furniture until she reached the general passenger deck. The general deck was not ugly, but it was very different from the first-class lounge. The chairs were simple and made of basic materials. The walls were plain metal instead of polished crystal. The lighting was bright and practical instead of soft and romantic. Most passengers here were ordinary people, workers, students, and families traveling between planets. Heijin found Taeho sitting alone near a huge window that showed the stars outside. He had chosen a seat far from other passengers, in a quiet corner where no one would bother him. The window was as tall as 3 people and as wide as a small room. Through it, she could see space itself. The stars looked strange because the ship was traveling so fast. Instead of tiny points of light, they appeared as long, bright lines stretching across the darkness. Colors mixed together, white, blue, red, and yellow, creating beautiful patterns that moved like rivers of light. This was hyperspace travel, faster than anything humans had dreamed of just a few hundred years ago. Taeho stared at these moving stars with eyes that seemed to see something else entirely. His face was very still, but Hajin could tell his mind was far away. Maybe he was thinking about his home planet, or about the place he had just left, or about things that had happened to him. His hands rested on his knees, and she noticed. They shook just a little bit. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, in her own language. The small device on her collar immediately changed her Centaurian words into perfect Korean. The translator was so good that it even copied the gentle tone of her voice. Technology had made it possible for people from different worlds to talk as easily as if they spoke the same language. Taeho looked up with surprise in his dark eyes. He had probably not expected anyone to approach him, especially not someone from the first-class section. For a moment, he seemed confused about why this well-dressed diplomat would want to sit with him. "Of course, Ambassador," he said politely, "though I am not much company right now." His voice was quiet and careful, the way people speak when they are very tired, or when they have learned to be cautious around strangers. He moved slightly to make room for her, even though there was already plenty of space. "I am Heijin," she said as she sat down in the chair next to his. She did not use her full title or mention her important family connections. She spoke like a normal person introducing herself to a friend. "Kim Taeho, Staff Sergeant, Human Defense Corps," he replied. Even when giving his name, he included his military rank and unit. This told Heijin that being a soldier was not just his job, it was who he was. The military had shaped how he spoke, how he sat, and how he introduced himself to others. "Where are you returning from?" she asked. "Hadrian's Edge," he said, then stopped talking. The name meant nothing special to Heijin, but the way he said it made her think it was important. He spoke those 2 words like they weighed 1,000 pounds. His voice became even quieter, and he looked back at the stars, moving past the window. Heijin waited, without saying anything. She had learned in her diplomatic training that sometimes silence was more powerful than questions. If you waited long enough, people would often tell you things they had not planned to share. After a long moment, Taeho spoke again. 18-month peacekeeping deployment. Just, doing our job. 18 months was a very long time to be away from home, especially for a peacekeeping mission. Most military deployments lasted only 6 to 12 months. Something about the way he said doing our job made Heijin think the job had been much harder than normal peacekeeping work. She looked at his hands again and saw they were shaking more now. His fingers moved against his knees, like he was trying to stop the trembling. His jaw was tight, and a small muscle near his eye twitched occasionally. These were signs that something had happened to him, something that still affected his body, even when he tried to stay calm. It must have been challenging, she said in a gentle voice. She chose the word challenging carefully. It was strong enough to show she understood this had been difficult, but not so strong that it would make him feel like she was prying into private matters. Before Taeho could answer her, loud sounds came from speakers all around the ship. The communication system made crackling noises, and then a clear voice spoke to all passengers. Attention passengers, we are receiving a priority transmission from Galactic Command regarding recent events at Hadrian's Edge. Please stand by for official updates. The moment the voice mentioned Hadrian's Edge, Taeho's face changed completely. All the color drained from his skin, making him look almost gray. His hands stopped shaking and became very still, like he was forcing them not to move. He turned his head toward the window and stared at the streaming stars as if they were the most interesting things in the universe. But Heijin could see that he was not really looking at the stars anymore. He was trying very hard not to look at her or think about whatever was happening at Hadrian's Edge. After the announcement about Hadrian's Edge, people all over the ship started gathering around the big screens in the common areas. The Stellar Crown had many places where passengers could sit together and watch news from across the galaxy. These areas had comfortable chairs arranged in rows facing large display screens that showed broadcasts from different planets. Within minutes, these spaces filled with curious passengers, Altarians, Centaurians, humans, and beings from many other worlds, all wanted to know what was happening at Hadrian's Edge. They talked in excited voices, mixing dozens of different languages, until the air buzzed with conversation. The news reports began playing on every screen. A serious-looking news reporter appeared, speaking in the common galactic language that most educated beings understood. Her words were translated into many languages by the ship's systems. We are receiving reports of a miraculous evacuation at Hadrian's Edge, the reporter said. Early information suggests that unprecedented heroism by a small military unit prevented what could have been a massive disaster. However, details remain limited as military officials continue their investigation. The reporter used big words, like miraculous and unprecedented, but she did not explain what actually happened. She talked about heroism and disaster without giving any real facts. This made the passengers even more curious and excited. Military officials appeared on screen next. They wore impressive uniforms covered with medals and ribbons that showed their high ranks. These important-looking officers praised the actions of a small peacekeeping unit that had performed beyond all expectations. But even these officials did not give specific details about what the soldiers had done or how many people had been saved. Heijin found Taeho sitting in the back of one common area, trying to stay hidden behind other passengers. She watched him carefully as the news played. With each word about Hadrian's Edge, he seemed to shrink further into his chair. His face became more pale, and his hands gripped the armrests tightly. More passengers kept arriving to watch the broadcasts. The room became crowded and noisy. People pointed at the screen and asked each other questions about what they thought had happened. Some made guesses about the disaster, while others wondered who the heroic soldiers might be. An elderly woman sitting near Taeho turned around and looked at him with curious eyes. "Excuse me, young man," she said in a kind voice. "You look like a soldier. Do you know anything about this situation at Hadrian's Edge?" Tejo's face went completely white. He mumbled something about needing fresh air and quickly stood up from his chair. He pushed through the crowd of passengers and left the room so fast that some people turned to stare at him. His sudden departure made him look even more suspicious. Heijin had spent many years working as a diplomat. Her job had taught her to notice small details about people and to ask the right questions to learn important information. Watching Tejo's strange behavior made her diplomatic instincts wake up like alarm bells in her mind. She decided to do some investigating of her own. First, she went to the ship's information center, where passenger records were kept. The Stellar Crown had to keep careful track of everyone on board for safety and legal reasons. These records showed where each passenger had boarded the ship and where they were going. She found the ship's purser, working at a desk covered with glowing tablets and data screens. The purser was a vegan, a species known for being very organized and professional. His green skin had a metallic shine, and his large eyes could see many different colors that other beings could not detect. "Excuse me," Heijin said politely. "I am trying to find information about passengers who boarded at Hadrian's Edge. It is for diplomatic reasons." The purser looked nervous. His green skin became slightly darker, which happened when Vegas felt uncomfortable. "I am not supposed to discuss passenger information," he said carefully. "But I suppose I can tell you that only 3 passengers boarded from Hadrian's Edge." "Only 3?" Heijin asked with surprise. "Yes. 2 of them are in the medical bay right now, recovering from injuries. The 3rd one," he paused and looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "The 3rd one is that human soldier you probably saw earlier. Staff Sergeant Kim Tejo." The purser leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Poor fellow looked completely exhausted when he boarded. I have never seen someone so tired." He kept apologizing for his appearance, saying he had not slept properly in days. He seemed almost afraid that we would not let him on the ship because of how he looked. This information made everything click together in Heijin's mind. Tejo had come from Hadrian's Edge. The news was about something heroic that happened at Hadrian's Edge, and Tejo was acting very strange. Whenever anyone mentioned the place, as word spread through the ship about the connection, other passengers began to notice Tejo wherever he went. When he walked through corridors, people would whisper and point at him. When he sat down to eat, conversations at nearby tables would stop as people stared at him. "Is that the soldier from Hadrian's Edge?" passengers asked each other in quiet voices. "What do you think he did there?" others wondered. "He must know something about what happened," people whispered. The mysterious human soldier became the most talked about person on the entire ship. Everyone wanted to know his story, but Tejo himself seemed to want nothing more than to disappear completely. The entire ship became quiet as something special appeared on every screen. In the restaurants, people stopped eating. In the lounges, conversations died away. Even the ship's background music seemed to fade as everyone turned to watch what was happening on the displays. A famous Altarian news reporter appeared on screen. Her crystal skin sparkled under the studio lights, and her voice carried the serious tone that news people used for the most important stories. She was well known across the galaxy for reporting only the biggest and most significant events. "Which we are about to show you," she said slowly, "represents one of the most remarkable acts of heroism in recent galactic history." The words hung in the air like thunder. Passengers throughout the ship leaned forward in their chairs. Some put down their drinks or food. Others called to friends and family members to come watch. Everyone could tell this was going to be something extraordinary. 3 days ago, the reporter continued, a catastrophic mining accident on Hadrian's Edge triggered seismic instabilities that threatened 3 major population centers. These areas were home to over 2 million civilians of various species. The screen filled with terrible images. Buildings shook and crumbled like children's toys. Huge cracks opened in the ground, swallowing vehicles and smaller structures. Smoke and dust clouds rose high into the sky, turning day into a gray, frightening twilight. People ran through the streets in panic. Altarian families carried their crystal children while trying to avoid falling debris. Centaurian workers used their strong bodies to help others, but even they looked small and helpless against the disaster. Beings from many different worlds all shared the same expression of terror as their safe homes became dangerous traps. The camera showed evacuation ships that should have rescued people, but they were broken and burning on landing pads. Emergency vehicles lay crushed under collapsed buildings. The planet's communication systems had failed, leaving authorities unable to coordinate any rescue efforts. The planet's local emergency services were completely destroyed, the reporter explained. Normal evacuation procedures became impossible. With over 2 million lives at risk, and no way to get help from other planets quickly enough, the situation seemed hopeless. Passengers on the Stellar Crown watched in horror. Many had friends or business contacts on mining worlds like Hadrian's Edge. They could imagine how terrifying it would be to face such a disaster with no hope of rescue. However, the reporter's voice became stronger. A small human peacekeeping unit took charge of the crisis, led by Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho. These soldiers coordinated a desperate 72-hour rescue operation using outdated equipment and facing impossible odds. The name hit the passengers like a shockwave. Kim Tae-ho, the same quiet, tired soldier who had been denied a seat in the first-class lounge. The same man who was right now somewhere on their ship, trying to avoid attention. Security camera footage began playing on the screens. The images were grainy and sometimes shaky, but they showed incredible scenes. A human soldier in a dirty uniform carried 2 small Altarian children through a corridor filled with smoke. The soldier's face was covered with dust and sweat, but passengers could recognize Taeho's features. More footage showed him organizing groups of civilians, pointing them toward safe routes, while explosions shook the ground around them. He moved with purpose and confidence, even when buildings collapsed just meters away from him. His uniform was torn, and blood stained his sleeves, but he never stopped working. The most amazing part was watching him refuse to leave. Again and again, he ran back into dangerous buildings to find people who might be trapped. He carried an elderly Centaurian on his back. He guided a group of terrified Altarian families through a maze of fallen debris. He never seemed to think about his own safety. Then came the testimonials. Survivors appeared on screen, speaking directly to the camera about what had happened to them. Their faces showed deep gratitude mixed with emotions that were hard to put into words. "The human soldier found us trapped under our collapsed home," said an Altarian woman, her crystal features glowing with tears. "He dug us out with his bare hands and carried my children to safety. Without him, we would all be dead." A Centaurian construction worker spoke next. "Staff Sergeant Kim organized our entire evacuation. He had a plan when no one else knew what to do. He saved hundreds of us from my worksite alone." More survivors told similar stories. A human family, a group of vegan students, workers from dozens of different species. All of them said the same thing. Tae-ho and his small team of soldiers had saved their lives when death seemed certain. The final footage was the most powerful of all. It showed the last day of the evacuation, when the ground shaking had become so bad that buildings fell constantly. Through the dust and smoke, the camera caught Tae-ho running into a collapsing structure one final time. He emerged minutes later, carrying a wounded civilian, just as the entire building came down behind him. Military analysts estimate, the reporter concluded, that without the actions of Staff Sergeant Kim and his unit, this would have been the greatest civilian disaster in modern galactic history. As the broadcast ended, absolute silence filled every room on the Stellar Crown. Passengers sat frozen in their chairs, trying to process what they had just learned. The quiet, humble soldier they had ignored or looked down upon had saved over 2 million lives. They had been sharing their journey with a genuine hero, and none of them had known it until now. The change on the stellar crown happened so fast. It seemed like magic. One moment, passengers were staring at their screens in shock. The next moment, they were all moving through the ship's corridors with one purpose: to find Staff Sergeant Kim Tae-ho. Haejin led the way, her diplomatic training helping her organize what could have become chaos. She knew that Tae-ho would not want hundreds of people crowding around him all at once. Instead, she helped coordinate small groups of passengers who wanted to thank him personally. They found Tae-ho on the observation deck, standing alone in front of the largest window on the ship. This deck was usually quiet because it was far from the restaurants and lounges. Tae-ho had chosen this place to hide from the attention he knew would come after the news broadcast. The observation deck had a curved ceiling made entirely of transparent material that gave passengers a perfect view of space. Stars moved past, in streams of light, as the ship traveled through hyperspace. The room was dimly lit so people could see outside better, creating a peaceful atmosphere that felt almost like a temple. Tae-ho stood with his back to the entrance, his shoulders tense with worry. He could hear footsteps approaching, but did not turn around. He probably hoped that if he ignored the sounds, people would leave him alone. The first person to reach him was Velinari, the Altarian Motor D, who had refused him service just hours earlier. The proud alien who had looked down on the human soldier now approached with hesitant steps, his crystalline features wet with tears. Altarians did not cry the same way humans did. Their tears looked like tiny diamonds falling from their eyes, creating small sparkling trails down their faces. These tears made soft musical sounds when they hit the floor, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Staff Sergeant Velinari said, his musical voice breaking with emotion. Tae-ho turned around slowly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. His face showed the same quiet dignity he had displayed when he was rejected. But now there was also confusion and embarrassment. My grandchildren, Velinari continued, struggling to find the right words. They were in the Hadrian City complex. The footage showed you carrying them to safety. The Altarian's voice became so quiet that other passengers had to lean forward to hear him. His usual proud manner was completely gone, replaced by deep gratitude and shame for how he had treated Tae-ho earlier. Tae-ho looked even more uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and avoided looking directly at Velinari's eyes. I was just doing my job, he said in his quiet voice. My whole team worked together. I was not alone out there, even when being thanked for saving lives. Tae-ho's first thought was to share credit with his fellow soldiers. This reaction made many passengers realize that his humility was real, not just politeness. Please, Velinari interrupted, raising one crystalline hand to stop Tae-ho from saying more. Allow me to offer you the finest accommodations this ship has. It is the least I can do for the person who saved my family. Before Tae-ho could respond, more passengers began approaching. They came in small groups, just as Haejin had organized. Each group represented people whose lives had been touched by what happened at Hadrian's Edge. A wealthy Centaurian merchant stepped forward next. His thick gray skin was polished to a shine, and he wore expensive robes that showed his high social status. Staff Sergeant, he said in his deep, rumbling voice, 23 of my workers were trapped in the mining complex. Your evacuation plan saved every one of them. The merchant reached into his robes and pulled out a small stone carving. It was made from rare crystal that only formed on the Centaurian homeworld. This is a traditional gift of deep respect among my people, he explained. Please accept it. An Altarian diplomat came next, carrying a glowing pendant that pulsed with soft blue light. My embassy staff owes their lives to your evacuation efforts, she said formally. This pendant contains a recording of our family's gratitude song. It will play whenever you touch it. More passengers followed, each bringing gifts from their home worlds and cultures. Some offered valuable items, while others brought simple handmade objects that meant more because of the personal effort involved. Taeho tried to refuse most of the expensive gifts, but the passengers insisted he accept them. "I keep telling everyone," Taeho said to Heijin, as they moved toward the first-class lounge. "I was not alone out there. My team Sergeant Park Minho, Corporal Lee Soyoung, Private Choi Jaemin, they all risked everything too. I just happened to be in charge." The way he said his teammates' names showed how much he cared about them getting proper recognition. Even in his moment of honor, he wanted to make sure his fellow soldiers were remembered. Heijin smiled at his response. "That is exactly why you deserve this recognition," she told him. "True leaders always share the credit with their team." The first-class lounge that had rejected Taeho now welcomed him as the guest of honor. Passengers who had ignored him earlier now listened carefully to every word he spoke. The expensive furniture and crystal decorations suddenly seemed less important than the presence of someone who had shown real courage. As the stellar crown approached New Geneva, the ship's captain made an announcement over the communication system. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to inform you that the heroic actions of Staff Sergeant Kim Taeho will be logged in our ship's permanent record and transmitted to Galactic Command for official recognition." Taeho stood by the same window, where Heijin had first found him, but now he was surrounded by friends instead of sitting alone. The lights of New Geneva grew brighter ahead, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself a small smile. Soon he would see his family again, and the nightmare of Hadrian's Edge would finally be behind him.